What a way to start. Graham, are you going to join me up here? The whole service, it's the Graham Show. Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Marie Pandel. It is my joy and honor to be the minister of this Unitarian Universalist community here at Summit. I look around this room and I see a room full of love. So many of you in this room knew and experienced Pierre in so many different walks of life. And while I only had 1 or 2 chances to meet Pierre before he left this plane, it is my honor to get to hear all about him through all of you and celebrate his life here with you today. I want to hold everyone in this moment and remind you that grief is as much a part of life as joy. And when we grieve, we know it is the price that we pay to have loved so well and so deeply. Your tears today are going to be as welcomed and as deeply held as your joy and laughter. I would like to invite Kathy Van Loo up to help us light our chalice. Our chalice is the Unitarian Universalist symbol of our faith. And Kathy, there's a little candle on the side there to help you light it. When we light our chalice, we know that it is a symbol of our community coming together. It's also holding the moments of the past that have brought us to this moment, and it is the spark of hope and light into the future. When we share in our time of chalice lighting together, we know we are held deeply and warmly and in compassion in these spaces. Pierre Vaughn was born on July 8, 1952 in Omaha, Nebraska, to parents Bill Vaughn, of Irish descent, and Marjorie Cords, whose family was French. Pierre was the 5th of 6 children, with 3 brothers named Bill, Mike, and Jim, and 2 sisters named Kathy and Michelle. Mom insisted on French names for 1 girl and 1 boy. His father agreed to Pierre, thinking that they'd just use the name Rocky as a nickname. Pierre means rock in French. But according to Pierre, the nickname never quite stuck, probably because it didn't so much match his physique. Note, however, that Dad still got the Irish in by naming him Pierre Patrick Vaughn. Pierre received his Bachelor of Science in Physics from Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois in 1974. He said he chose physics because he noticed that the biology majors were required to get up early and come in over the weekend in order to feed their animals. Pierre received a perfect LSAT score, which is the entrance exam for law school, and it led to many offers of admission to law school. He received a personal letter from the dean of Bolt Hall Law School at UC Berkeley, noting that Pierre's admission letter was refreshing. Pierre, who had fairly low grades his first years of college, didn't we all? Okay, maybe not everyone. He had written that he had spent his first few years at college studying life. Pierre said that one leading reason he ultimately chose Berkeley was because he saw roses blooming when he came for his January interview. He said that he found that much preferable to years of winter snow. Pierre started law school with Joni Caucus, a woman in her 30s returning to school in Gary Trudeau's comic strip Doonesbury. Both graduated from Bolt Hall in 1977. While Pierre lost his eyesight during law school from complications of childhood diabetes, he took only one semester off to study Braille, mobility training, and to arrange for all of his books to be recorded. In typical Pierre fashion, he passed the California State Bar on his first try. Pierre met Debbie in grad school, as they were both in the dorm for law students and graduate students. Debbie's floor was the party floor on which Pierre spent a lot of time. Debbie and a girlfriend started teaching others how to do the jitterbug in the narrow hallways, eventually moving downstairs to the cafeteria. The resulting social dance club ended up attracting 30 people every month, and Pierre was one of the best students. During this time, Debbie began cutting Pierre's hair. As a thank you, Pierre took Debbie to a new and very chic restaurant run by Alice Waters called Chez Panisse. Upon arrival, Debbie realized this was more than just haircut payment. And it was the beginning of a long love affair where they shared a passion for fine dining and cooking together. He still had some vision at this time, so Debbie is pleased to know that Pierre's visual memory of her would always be of her in her early 20s. In fact, he was known to reminisce about her corduroy jeans and the macrame belt that would swing when she was dancing. In 1976, Pierre and Debbie were married. Pierre often said this was so he could answer the phone. A priest from the UC Berkeley Newman Center officiated at the Catholic Church in San Mateo, where Debbie had grown up and where her parents still attended. The parish priest had been concerned because Debbie and Pierre wanted to write their own vows, or as he said, fiddle with the words. The Newman Center priest was fine with this. In fact, he said they could do anything they wanted as long as they got into the church, said I do, and got out afterwards. He said they could even ride in an elephant if they wanted. While Debbie finished graduate school, Pierre worked in San Francisco in the district attorney's office. At this time, Debbie and Pierre moved to San Francisco to a Victorian-era flat on Nob Hill with a view of Colt Tower. Pierre had a guide dog at the time, Kayak, who would help him board the cable car which passed by their apartment on the way to work. After Debbie graduated in 1980, they moved here to San Diego, where Debbie had been appointed as professor of epidemiology at UCSD School of Medicine. Pierre opened his own law practice here, which ran up until he passed. His practice began as general family practice, but he gradually began to focus on employment law, including workers' comp, personal injury, and discrimination. Pierre loved helping people get the support they needed, often taking on to Debbie what seemed to be the role of a social worker. He also loved the challenge of a difficult case and would take ones that might not make much money but were intellectually challenging, or because he felt bad for the injured person. He became known for being willing to go to trial if a negotiation offer was lower than he thought he deserved. In 1981, Pierre and Debbie adopted their first son, Brendan, and in 1983, their second son, Kyle. Pierre loved being a parent and sharing his passion of music, the theater, and travel with them. Both guys went to the School of Performing Arts and participated actively in San Diego Junior Theater. As an adult, Brendan worked as a personal assistant to the rich and famous, including one member of the band U2 and Courtney Love, and more recently, as an event planner and auctioneer. Kyle is a talented dancer and singer who has performed all over the world. Pierre was known to say that he never expected to get married or have a family, and often said how lucky he was to have both. The only regret Debbie remembers Pierre ever sharing about his blindness was not being able to see his sons' faces or to see Kyle dance. As the boys were growing up, Pierre fully participated as husband and father. He cooked, he cleaned, although he never mastered sorting laundry into whites and colors. He would help with homework and take care of the guys when Debbie was at committee meetings or attending conferences. There was one memorable afternoon, and it bears stating, these are all Debbie's words, and this is, I think, one of my favorite moments. There was a memorable afternoon when he was talking to Debbie on the phone long distance when he suddenly said, "I smell paint," and hung up. It turns out the guys, who were about 3 and 5 at the time, decided their cardboard house would look much better with a coat of yellow paint. Pierre cleaned as best as he could, and Debbie had to wait until she returned from the conference to assess the damage. To this day, there are still faint yellow footprints in the garage. Both Debbie and Pierre were raised Catholic, but in 2004, they began looking for a spiritual home that would accept their gay sons. And for Pierre, it had to have a good music program. Pierre soon joined the choir and eventually would also serve as cantor here at Summit. Both Debbie and Pierre found Summit a wonderful, welcoming, and supportive community, and soon could count more friends from the Summit community than anywhere else. Pierre even found several members who were also from Nebraska, including Lamar Rogers and Ed Henry. He became close friends with many members of the Men's Covenant group, as well as the Tuesday night men's support group, Summit's book club, and of course, the choir. While early on, Pierre claimed he would never be on a committee, he eventually served as the board president, twice, trustee of the endowment fund, and a member of the ministerial search committee, which I think is the most complicated of all that he served on. When discussing his spiritual practice in a 2006 holiday letter, Pierre had the following to say, shortened for today's purpose, but a longer version is certainly available for request. Can you really say prayers every day if you doubt their efficacy? Though physical exercise might be spiritual, it also requires effort. Is it spiritual if it's hard work? In our house, Pierre does most of the food preparation. There are those who think of food preparation as a daily chore. There are others who think that meditation and prayer are daily chores. You may choose to have fruits and vegetables with every meal because it is healthful, or you can find that pear in your fruit basket that you've been watching for several days and which you know is still crisp yet just about to turn sweet. You can then slice it thin over organic greens with fennel bulb or roasted beet or avocado and make up a homemade basil shallot balsamic vinaigrette with extra virgin olive oil. During the process, you can contemplate the textures, the colors, the shapes, the scent, and ultimately the taste of each item, and then the completed dish. We hope for you a spiritual practice that fortifies and replenishes your soul. One cannot talk about Pierre without acknowledging his many health challenges, although he rarely spoke of them or let them interfere with his enjoyment of life. Pierre was diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 11, lost his eyesight during law school. Soon after, Debbie introduced him to a friend who had a guide dog, and over the years, Pierre had 6 wonderful guide dogs of his own: Kayak, Morty, Damon, Jesse, Montego, and Graham. In 1982, Pierre suffered kidney failure, also from his diabetes, and received a transplant from his brother, Mike. In 2000, he received a pancreas from a younger woman who had suffered a fatal accident, but it cured his diabetes. His brother's kidney worked until 2014, much longer than expected. But at the time, the wait for a kidney was very long and his health was failing. Much to his surprise, unsolicited, many Summit members offered to be a living donor. 4 were tested, and Mark Wheeler was identified as a good match. The transplant was successfully completed in 2015. Because of the many years on immunosuppressants necessary to keep the transplanted kidneys and pancreas functioning, Pierre developed multiple cancers, necessitating surgeries, radiation, chemotherapy, and proton therapy. A bone infection resulted in the amputation of 2 fingers in 2012, and a car accident in 2019 resulted in severe trauma to both legs. And yet, despite all of this, Pierre was a wonderful soulmate and father and supported Debbie when she had her surgery for breast cancer in 1991 and in 2001. Though his death came as a surprise, Pierre believed that he had lived far longer and far better than I think he expected. He frequently commented on how lucky he was and how he enjoyed life to the fullest. Pierre loved to travel, especially to Ireland. He loved singing, especially Irish ballads, and he loved cooking, including homemade corned beef. Pierre lived life with gusto. He was willing to try anything, and he loved exploring the world. May you all find the same gusto and love in your lives as Pierre experienced. And now I would like to invite Laurel Bernstein, Lisa Garvey, Janet Dixon, Stacy Sasaki, and Barbara Scheidecker for our next musical interlude.
The 4 of us sang in the choir with Pierre, where he was a dearly beloved tenor and sat right behind me, and I miss his voice. I didn't know until Debbie said today that Pierre had chosen this song for their wedding.
Some have changed, some forever, not for better. Some have gone, and some remain. All these places had their moments. With lovers and friends, I still can recall. Some are dead and some are living. In my life, I love them all. something new, though I know I'll never ever lose affection for people and things that went before. I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I love you more. In my life, I love you more.
That was so beautiful. Thank you all for sharing that with us. We get a special treat today because Pierre did so much in his life. Although Debbie's words that I previously shared did a really wonderful job of encompassing his life, we get the chance to hear from a few folks who are going to tell us about different parts of Pierre's life. So for those of us who didn't know him in the capacities that we're about to hear about, what a special gift we get to share together. So I'd like to invite Michelle Johnson, Pierre's sister.
Hello there, I'm Michelle, and Pierre, as you will find and you've already known, was an incredibly remarkable individual and a pretty darn remarkable brother. Actually, Kathy, that's my sister who lit the candle, who is the oldest sister. It was Bill, then Kathy, then me, then Mike, who helped me up the stairs. Then Pierre, with a 4-year gap before Pierre. So that enters into who he became, I think. And then finally Jim, who was our baby. He still is. So Pierre was, Kathy and I both used the same words, golden child. She was saying it separately after I'd already written it down in my notes. Because we always thought of him that way. Oh, his picture's up there. Oh, that's great. Because that will show you. Except it doesn't show his curls because Mom probably tamed them that day. But he had a whole little circle of golden curls. He had the biggest, bluest eyes. He was charming. He was happy all the time because he came in 4 years later. My mother just loved the hell out of him, just thought, oh my God, I got another one. Yay, I got a baby. So we as older sisters didn't really do, and we never changed a diaper. We never did any of that sort of thing because my mother wouldn't let us because she wanted to do it. And so it wasn't until he became like 4 and 5 that we started actually doing things like bathing him in the bathtub or watching him outside. Once she'd let a few things go away. And anyway, during 1958 is one of my first strong memories of little Pierre. And he was like 5 years old. And there was a song, the novelty song out at the time called Little Blue Man. And we had a talent show at our local school, the Blessed Sacrament School, that Kathy and I and Pierre entered. And Kathy played the piano and I sang, and you'll see what Pierre did. And this is the song. Excuse my voice. I've been out of voice lately, but what the heck. Okay. He said, one morning when I was out shopping, though you'll find it hard to believe, a little blue man came out of the crowd and timidly tugged at my sleeve. Then Pierre, I love you, said the little blue man. I love you to bits. I love you, said the little blue man, and scared me right out of my wits. And it went on. And anyway, we won first prize. And guess why? Could it have anything to do with this little cute guy in his little blue suit that my mother made? I think so. But anyway, we won like $20, $25, didn't give Pierre a cent of it. We split it between Kathy and me. Anyway, so That was him as the charming little guy who the Girl Scouts, that mom was our Girl Scout leader. They would just ooh and ah over him every week. But so he probably was pretty full of himself by the time grade school rolled around. But he was also incredibly smart and immediately came out as smart and curious and passionate, which carried him all the way up through school. But starting in grade school, he always got good grades. But and his teachers, liked his work. But he was also a little know-it-all. And as Kathy said, he was always piping up with the right answer. So, probably unasked sometimes. And also, he had collections at an early age. He had stamp collections, coin collections. And it was just, so careful and perfect about everything. And he played every game, because our Vaughn family, we were the 6 kids. We played every kind of game. And we were incredibly competitive. But he and my oldest brother, Bill, were the most competitive of all. And there were several stories, because I asked my brothers and sisters, what should I say? And they gave me several different stories about his competitiveness. I won't go into that in too much detail. But here's one of Kathy's. She said they played hearts, and she was his partner. And he was only like 14, maybe 15 at the time. And she did something, and he said, that was a really dumb move. And Kathy, who's always sweet, said, oh, Pierre, you're right. And Pierre said, I can't even argue with you. Which Pierre loved to do too. So, and then Mike said that he showed no mercy, and in almost the same language. Oh no, Jim said he had no mercy. Mike said he had no pity, no remorse. And so I could see him in the courtroom. He must have been. I never did see him, and I wish I had, because I bet he was, he was probably great. But we soon found out he was also incredibly brave. He was indomitable, because about the age of 10, he'd gotten chubby, but then all of a sudden he started losing a lot of weight, and he started having different symptoms. So my folks took him to the doctor and found out he had type 1 diabetes. Well, Dad, as Kathy remembers, Dad gave him the first shot or so, and then Pierre started giving him his own shots almost right away, tested himself almost right away. But on the downside, he refused to give up any of his childhood pursuits, so he still played baseball, and he still did everything else he wanted to do in outdoor games and lived his regular life. And so his insulin was always like, so he was I remember him either going into insulin shock or the opposite, and so I'm sure that wasn't probably good for him. But he's just so indomitable, he just wasn't going to let anything stop him. And yes, then he went through, years, and he still worked outside jobs in high school and everything. He was a waiter at a restaurant, and when he went to college, he worked as a truck driver, along with doing all of his classes and acing them all. And so, along with the scholarship he won to Northwestern, he was on full scholarship to Berkeley Law, right, as I'm remembering, and with that LSAT score and everything. And so during Berkeley, that was when he started losing his sight as he went through the last years of law school, but he found Debbie. And that was a huge, huge, wonderful thing for him. Debbie has been the perfect partner. Everyone in our family knows that, is aware of it, and prizes her, and just partly because she's just a lot of fun and a good kid, but partly because she was so perfect with Pierre, and Pierre was perfect with her. They were like that, they were like a perfect couple. They did find, I remember the ballroom dancing really early on, hearing you guys and seeing you finally do ballroom dancing, which was great. But I do remember, too, after he graduated law school and got his job as the assistant DA, and you got your opportunity down here to be Pierre, which was unusual for the time, even if you were sighted, said, oh, no, I'll pick up and go down to San Diego and leave my job, and without knowing what I'm going to do next down to San Diego. And in San Diego, it's like he had all these credentials up the wazoo, but he was blind. And there was law firms, he applied for law firms that wouldn't take him because he was blind. Nowadays, you could sue the law firm, but then you didn't do that. So what did he do? He started his own practice. So, because that's, again, Pierre. But also, it just shows the great love he had for Debbie that, oh, sure, I'll move with you down to San Diego and start a new life. And then after he became blind, I remember him this way because he accomplished, these are only some of the firsts that I remember. First swim in the ocean, first dive off a diving board, first time he ever skied. Kathy remembers him going up in the mountains of Oregon down a sled that at the bottom of this steep, steep, steep hill, there was a big hump that where everybody was flying up in the air. And I'm sure he knew about that before he got in it by himself. And he did it anyway, flew up in the air, flew down, they walked away from it, didn't care. And so he hiked and hiked further and faster than anybody, sometimes with his dog, sometimes with Debbie there, and they'd be just kind of a couple. And anyway, so but he had this other side to him of bravery was he flew by himself, for instance, up to see my sister on a flight that landed at midnight and had to find a taxi to get to her place in Salem, Oregon, because my mother was sick with Alzheimer's. And so he wanted to talk with her and help her counsel her. And he came back another time when my mom was at kind of the last stages of Alzheimer's. And she was kind of at this place where she was sitting and staring and there wasn't much contact that could be made. And Kathy remembers he held her hand and sang, "Oh, Danny Boy." And that, that brought tears to my mother's eyes, And that was the other incredible side of Pierre. We had 4 great trips to Europe with them. We went to Spain and Italy and France, and had some wonderful, wonderful things. But that showed me many sides of Pierre that we were able to be one-on-one for a long time. We were very lucky for that with Pierre and Debbie. He had an incredible sense of humor. He laughed a lot, didn't mind being laughed at, had a really sarcastic, sardonic sense of humor. I'm sure you've all been aware of that. He was incredibly passionate. You'd take him to a museum, and then he would walk. Sometime Debbie did that. She did that a lot, but then when we were traveling, we would do it. Well, he would take our elbow and we'd walk around the room and I would describe whatever painting or sculpture. And it was like, he was there. It was like he saw it. And not only that, it was like, I saw it. I saw it better than I would have seen it. So I got as much as as he got from that experience, which, because his passion was, he was able to touch Bernini's and touch Donatello's, because in Italy they let blind people do that. And I remember him feeling these incredible sculptures and just loving it, because it wasn't something he did passively. It was something he did actively. It was just, it was so important to him. Churches, descriptions of everything. He just took it in. And I still remember he and Debbie in the Cinque Terre and places like that where we would sit down and say, okay, well, I think we're ready for a glass of wine. And they would go off hiking another mile or hiking another 2 miles. And finally, we had this one time where we were in LaGuardia Airport. We were missing a connection. We were ready to miss a connection. And so we were all running for the new gate, running, Gary and me ahead. And I thought, oh, Pierre and Debbie, they'll never make it. 'Cause how could Pierre do it? And then I see Pierre and Debbie swinging by us, arm in arm, like 2 gazelles, flying, they passed us up like we were standing still, because they were so much in sync by that point in their lives. So anyway, I'm almost done here, but it's just, I wanted to just mention that the last part is that what a good guy he was. And just a couple of examples. He loaned us money when we were down to this point where we couldn't pay the mortgage the next month. It didn't even stop and think a second. Debbie, too, of course. He hired our daughter-in-law, Brandon, who was trying to decide whether she wanted to go into law. He hired her as a paralegal, and she worked with him for some time and decided, yes, I'm going to become a lawyer, and probably because of Pierre's example and this, what she saw there in the office. And he's done pro bono work for many, not just for many in the family, us, I too, for sure, but also I was involved with a senior organization in the community where I live, Topanga, And he did, and I could pick up the phone and say, well, so-and-so needs to know about this and that. And he would put his researchers to work on it. Then he'd come up with, come up with the free legal advice and that I'd pass along. And he was doing that kind of thing all the time. So finally, I'm just going to say, so when I think of my incredible brother Pierre, I see him strong and smiling, taking life by the horns, always ready for a new adventure, passionately curious, incredibly brilliant, kind, sweet, funny, a truly good guy, simply irreplaceable.
Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful stories with us, Michelle. Next, we have a couple of really special readings that Jim and Mike are going to do for us. These are actually poems that Pierre wrote himself. So Jim will be reading Wedding, followed by Mike reading First Anniversary.
Hello, everybody. Right before I read the poem that Pierre wrote, I just want to add a little bit to what Michelle said. But I have a different perspective. I was the youngest of 6, so I looked up to my brother. I had no choice. He was my older brother. As I remember childhood, we kind of had different friendships with different people, but we always ended up hanging out together a lot. And we would end up playing games together, like board games and ping pong and pool, and he would always win. So as we said, no mercy to the younger brother. So, and then, yes, about the collections, Pierre would get into something really deeply, 100%, and then I would kind of notice and I would follow along. He wouldn't tell me to do things. I would just, if he collected coins or stamps, I ended up collecting coins or stamps, And then later in life, when he got to be teenage years, it was music. He was into so many wonderful music at the time. And he turned me on to Elton John, Joni Mitchell, and even Greg Allman. I said, he came home from college and said, you have to listen to this Greg Allman album. I said, who's Greg Allman, This is all we had that day, in those days, was the radio top 40. So a lot of these artists you didn't hear on the radio. So once again, I followed along with his suggestions and enjoyed all of them. Skipping way ahead, the last 10 years or so, I guess, we talked a lot more on the phone. Prior to that, we would get together at family reunions, family get-togethers, and always catch up and enjoy each other's company. But I really started to really love those phone calls, maybe once a month or so. And he would talk about what was happening in his family, and you probably know about the dinners that Pierre and Debbie would have, these special themed dinners like for St. Patrick's Day or other things. And usually it was because somebody won a raffle ticket at a place like Summit and ended up going to his house, a dinner for 10 or 12, whatever it was. And he would talk about that. Of course, he would talk about what the boys were doing, what Brendan was up to, what Kyle was up to. And it was always just a great conversation. And occasionally we would have strong differences of opinion on movies or music or something like that. But I cherish those calls. And more recently, we would end our calls by saying, I love you. So I move along to do his poetry. This came out with a wedding invitation that Pierre wrote. Of course, we are in love, but we never intended it that way. All along, we only intended to be truthful, nice, and gentle with each other. It's as if on a winter evening, a cinder was to fall at your feet, and you looked to find that a star had lost its place. And the next morning you awoke to find everything had turned to spring. The vows do not frighten us, as we do not ask for everlasting love. On each day that we have, we only intend to be truthful and nice and gentle with each other. Thank you.
I was 4 years older than Pierre, and I won't go into a lot of stories, but basically, I think for me and for Susan, it was so special to always come out here and spend time with Pierre and Debbie, and the other thing I wanted to mention is that I sort of feel like I know you folks a little bit because we attended a lot of Zoom meetings during the pandemic, and we're Unitarian Universalists also. Our fellowship is very, very small, but anyway, I always have felt this cascade of warm feelings that you share amongst yourselves when you do your services, and I'm feeling them today. So, okay, so a year later, Pierre wrote a first anniversary poem, 1977. And it was very poignant to me, and I think it will be to you. And once I wondered how I would know love, by sight or sound or touch, yet so it was described in only most awkward terms, and none could say how love should feel, or how its footsteps sound when it is near, or how it appears when seen from afar. Yet still, love it was I found, and love I have with you. Like no work of art, I sense this love without my senses. And no matter how they are dimmed or lost, our love will never be, as it depends upon them not at all. For one thing is sure, when nothing else is known to me, your love will be.
Sorry, that was my fault for not introducing you. No. I was ready for the slides and I skipped them. Sorry.
I was so engrossed with the poem. Hi. Hi. How are we? Are we good? Wherever he is, I know he's looking down right now at all of you, smiling, laughing, loving, and probably going, this is running a little long already. So, I'm going to read this. I'm so sorry. I've been writing something like this for 10 years, and I looked at it this morning and I go, this is such a piece of shit. But he would love it, so I'm going to read it. Good morning, all you loved ones. Contrary to most of the times I have opened my mouth to share my feelings, thoughts, and my many, many opinions over these admittedly privileged 42 years on this beautiful spinning rock, never before have I ever strived to achieve so intently some concision, clarity, and hopefully resonance from a speech. Though I have stood in very similar situations more times than most people my age, even hosting and guiding such life moments for others we've lost, sometimes tragically young, I vulnerably admit to you all right now, as my witnesses, I do not even know what I'm doing or even truly what to feel, and that both of these unavoidable truths for me, and hopefully for all of you, are changing day by day. And I am all at once crestfallen, terrified, and heartbroken, but equally resolute, grateful, and at peace. And that I have come to not only accept, but embrace. That is not only okay, but actually quite normal and human. This unbridled, unprepared, uncertain, jumbled mess of emotions, sewn desperately together by an attempt at sense and sensibility, is what it truly means to be alive. It is messy, but beautiful. And ultimately what makes us a community, a family, and truly, truly human. My father is the one that taught me this, the one who demonstrated what it meant to be a human, a great human, the one that showed me this honest, noble, beautiful way of being. Dad showed me and many of us how to not only live to the fullest, but also live all of life for what it is, a precious and short, magical ride of uncertainty and wonder. Most don't know this, but initially my father didn't even want to be a dad. In fact, he didn't want to even get married or do many traditional things that tethered the well-being of other people's hearts to his own. Not because of selfishness, ambition, or lack of love, but rather from early dark harbingers delivered by countless, perhaps well-intentioned elders and physicians who warned of a short life due to having type 1 diabetes. However, love and light always found its leading way through great family like my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, particularly my Uncle Mike, who gave my father a kidney that miraculously lasted far beyond probability. And later, dear friends, especially like Mark, who gave yet another, that took over until the end. And then there is my mother, who I know he would say far more eloquently than I was his better half. My mom is the purest loving heart I have ever known. That early on became his partner, champion, and ultimately his provider for life's greater opportunities. Experiences that would be near impossible without such aid. My father, though remarkably and almost freakishly independent, talented, brilliant, and self-sufficient, never underplayed to me the importance of love and respect for the people in our lives that give us meaning and purpose. It was not despite, but because of his adversities that he found and was blessed by the truly best humans who live and love with such brave and powerful spirits. And through this love and my mother's passionate cajoling, they sought adoption of me and my brother Kyle in 1981 and 83, respectively. And the early years were great. I know it's cliche, but we really did have a perfect childhood. From the very beginning, though a uniquely challenged family, Mom and Dad raised us to be aware of, but never feel, the adversity of these obstacles. As long as I can remember, I knew I was adopted, that my mother was unable to have biological children, that my father was blind and had a condition that required multiple daily blood tests and a highly trained, ever-present dog to function as a normal person. My father and mother never let these differences, though, make us feel different in any negative way. And so successfully installed in me a belief that uniqueness was something to celebrate. I remember even when we would rough play as monsters as little boys with my dad, my brother and I, my dad, and we'd run around and he's blind and he'd be chasing us through the house. And we'd throw furniture in front of him and try and trip him, and we would try to be so quiet. We realized as kids, we were like, if we're just really, really quiet, he can't see us. It was horrible. We were horrible children. And even still, his hearing was so sharp that we rarely ever evaded him capturing us and wrestling us to the ground, half in laughter, half in terrifying fear. Even in this early development, I observed that when something everyone else had that you don't is the challenge. but that the feeling of inadequacy or even loneliness in one's sense of uniqueness can be overcome if you simply embrace it not as a weakness, but as an opportunity to strengthen your other gifts. My father, less through traditional modalities and more through actions and a way of being, continually taught me not not to be ignorantly hopeful of things outside of my control, rather be relentlessly positive while simultaneously always striving to be a seeker of objective truth. My father practiced loving justice with us in this way in almost unshakable consistency, always providing, but always encouraging us to find our own personal stories, never insensitive, but never coddling. That was my mom's job. People will have all sorts of opinions on the outcome, but I believe in my heart and mind that Dad looked at child rearing as he did with all other things in life, as a challenging and terrifyingly awful, but ultimately an overwhelmingly beautiful experience that, as he told me many times, really shaped what can only be described as a well-lived life. Many say this, some out of respect and obligation, but some from real inarguable truth. I say it because I truly believe it. My dad was the best. He was and is a sharing example of what it means to be the best of humanity. Though both challenging children, even into adulthood, my father was always a great dad and tirelessly stood by us with loyalty and patient guidance. To his very last breath, he loved us and cared for us equally with endless understanding and compassion, with a healthy unconditionality that, though questionable in certain moments of personal failings and falter in both mine and my brother's unique life journeys, over time arced into such profound and well-exacted wisdom, like a rainbow after a great storm. It's the personal strength, sacrifice, and devotion to the duty of being a parent that I see now with such clarity and profound respect. It has built me to not only survive, but to thrive in my darkest hours. It incomparably aided and emboldened me to become the person you see before you. Without him, I would have perished many times over at the hands of fate and foe. And it is with great dignity and a sense of duty to all humankind and profound grace that my father's way of being in this short time on this spinning rock has shown me, and hopefully many, if not all of you, that life is the most beautiful gift. The most beautiful gift. A rare and mathematical miracle that he was blessed with and so brilliantly and generously shared with all of us. Though my heart will miss him forever, it is also fuller than ever before with gratitude, honor, and pride. And I will never forget what my father was and is: a powerful and precious, pure truth and absolute love. Thank you, guys.
And now we have some special music by our lovely pianist, Barbara, and some slides so we can see a little more of what Pierre's life was like.
Just one little word here. Karen Fellingstad called me yesterday before she went in for surgery for a broken hip and was so concerned about what I was going to play for this slideshow and telling me everything she was going to play. And I said, Karen, I'm going to play different music, but she just keeps rattling off all the different things that she wants me to play. And she was just so concerned and really would have loved to have been here. And I'm going to go see her after this. And I think she's probably watching on Zoom, so I hope I don't make too many mistakes.
words. Thank you, Barbara, for stepping in and really giving us an idea of how much Pierre meant to you. Our next two speakers will be sharing about the law school and practice years and the summit years. So I would like to invite Mark Field up, followed by Mark Wheeler.
Thank you. Pierre and I met in law school before either one of us knew Debbie, or she us, though it wasn't by much. And in fact, Pierre and I, our second year, were roommates in law school. We were roommates in law school because Debbie knows that she and Pierre were living together at that point in time, and Pierre spent exactly one night in the very nice apartment that we shared. That one night came about because Debbie's parents weren't supposed to know about this arrangement, and they decided to come up and pay a visit. So Pierre came scurrying back to his apartment. We kept in touch after law school in a variety of ways: weddings, Phantom of the Opera tickets, baseball games, a ski vacation with the kids. Brendan and Kyle probably remember that. But mostly through what Debbie and the boys probably thought of as an interminable series of phone calls over the years. And, we kept up to date on everything going on with Pierre and family, and my kids clearly knew who Pierre was. In fact, I think Megan and Brendan are still Facebook friends. Well, And at one point I was talking to my kids, we were talking about Pierre, and I made some comment about how smart Pierre was, something that Michelle covered, and I don't need to go into detail, but my daughter Megan asked me, well, who's the smartest person you know? It was Pierre. And let me just talk about that in the context of law school and his legal practice. It was in, I think, February of our first year in law school that Pierre told me that he was going down to Stanford Medical Center for experimental laser treatments on his retinopathy. That's the condition that involves bleeding inside your eyes. If you can't stop the bleeding, you will eventually go blind. And Pierre knew that that was a likely outcome. Now, I can guarantee you that the last half of your first year in law school is not a time of low stress. Your first year grades count for a tremendous amount towards your future as a lawyer. And Pierre had added to that stress the burden of recognizing that there was a good chance that he was going to lose his vision. Notwithstanding that, he achieved grades near the top of the class. Now, I can guarantee you that I could not have done that if somebody had told me that I was going blind, or likely to. And I know that that's true because nobody did tell me that, and my grades were nowhere near Pierre's. So, by roughly December of our second year in law school, Pierre had lost the ability to read. He had to completely reconstruct the way he studied, the way he learned, the way he approached the idea of being a lawyer. And he did that and still maintained excellent grades throughout the remainder of law school. In our third year, Pierre, like most of us, took a class called something like trial practice or civil trial practice. The reason you take a class like that, and I took one too, is that law school doesn't actually teach you how to be a lawyer. It crams a bunch of law into you, but it doesn't teach you anything about things like, well, how do you run a law practice, or what do you do with your client trust account, or how do you try a case? So Pierre took this class, and the point of the class was you were given a set of facts and witnesses, you were told to prepare the case for trial, and then the culmination, your final exam, was to try the case in front of all the kids in the class and the teacher, professor. Well, Pierre's client was the charming and innocent Debbie, and the evil wrongdoer was me. So the highlight of the trial was Pierre cross-examining me on the stand, and I still remember that. I have subsequently, as a lawyer, been cross-examined several times by big-name lawyers at big-name firms, and not one of them did as good a job as Pierre did as a third-year law student. So the teacher was incredibly impressed by Pierre's performance in this class. And it's always good to impress the teacher, of course, but in this particular case, the guy teaching the class was the guy who literally wrote the book on California trial practice. That was the name of the book, California Trial Practice. And he went to his law firm and said, "We need to hire this guy." And they wouldn't do it. Because, oh, you have to get a reader, there'd be a dog on the premises, and you don't want to hear about it. That remained true for all of the other law firms that Pierre applied to in San Francisco. So you had a situation in which the person who was really the star of the class, given his grades, his recommendation, a glowing recommendation by the single most important person he could have gotten it from, and the fact that he had overcome going blind in the middle of law school, and nobody would hire him. He finally got a job with the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. I don't want to say anything particularly negative about the San Francisco DA's office. But let me just say that the work that they gave him to do, especially at the beginning, was probably not challenging for Pierre. Then, of course, Debbie finished her degree, and they moved down to San Diego for Debbie to start her career. And Pierre discovered that the lawyers in San Diego were just as much assholes as the lawyers in San Francisco. So he did the only thing he could reasonably do. He didn't really want to be a district attorney at the end of the day. So he started his own firm. Well, starting your own law firm is incredibly difficult. There are all kinds of things that law school didn't teach him. He had no background in because he hadn't been in a law firm before. He'd been with the district attorney. And you have to know all kinds of things. How do you get a client? How do you operate a client trust fund? How do you pay for the people that you have? And, oh yeah, you've got to withhold their taxes, and all kinds of details about running a business and a legal practice that you have never learned, and Pierre had to learn on the fly. In addition to that, of course, he had to deal with a staggering list of medical issues over the course of running the business. I venture to say that Pierre's lifetime medical expenses were probably greater than everybody in this room combined. Plus, they were raising 2 lovely children, and he was in and out of the practice for being in the hospital and other occasions. Notwithstanding all of that, Pierre not only made that firm a success, he made it thrive. Now, one reason Pierre was able to do that was because he was exceptionally talented. But that's not the only reason, and maybe it's not even the most important reason. The most important reason, I think, is strength of character, because he just wasn't going to let it stop him, and he kept on going. Now, much as I think highly of Pierre's character, I don't want to leave the impression that he did that entirely on his own, because he didn't. Debbie was there at every moment of the time. Literally, we probably met Debbie on the same day, because, as Michelle pointed out, her room was an active place during that first year in law school. But she was there from the beginning, and she was always there. She had her own extremely important career to manage. She had to be there for Pierre and with Pierre when he was hospitalized or having any of his incredibly numerous medical issues. She had to be there for the boys when Pierre couldn't. And she was the rock for Pierre at all times. Now, my kids never asked me who it was I admired most in the world. But if they had, the question would have been easy. It was Pierre and Debbie.
Hey, can we get that photo up where he's scaling? There we go. Yeah. Wow. I met Pierre at Summit. 2004, we'd been here a couple of months. We're both recovering Catholics. And we both struggled with religious community. Arguably, I think we were both atheists and skeptics for sure. And we found the Catholic community a bitter tea at that time. And so we met Debbie and Pierre here, not here in the strip mall version of Summit, but in the Masonic Lodge version of Summit. And for the next 20 years or so, we talked a lot about Summit and talked a lot about religious community and about God and not God. And he was just an amazingly deep thinker and remarkably honest about the range of emotions that go into all that. So it was always a pleasure, an honor, and an inspiration to have a chance to be with Pierre and to think about Summit. So I'm going to talk about the Summit years. We were on the Ministerial Search Committee together. What a great time that was. Yeah, but you know, we got to know each other as foodies. And you get to know a Ministerial Search Committee. If you're on one, you get to know the people on that committee pretty well. It's a trust the community places in you, and you're asked to evaluate these amazing people coming out of seminary. And Pierre and Gwen and Tony and Fern, and it was just an amazing group. We spent a full year and then some thinking about how to help Summit choose its next minister. And that spirit of concern for Summit animated Pierre's every thought about this place and the people in it. He really cared. We were in choir together, usually over there, and I don't think a single choir master enjoyed our company. I know Pat Brining didn't. Shush, 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 quiet, shush. Oh, quiet, shush. Because Pierre was always cracking jokes. He was always on key. He knew the song by heart. He would come in, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, and sing from memory. Amazing. But he always was a wiseacre in the back row with the guys. And I think I love music, and Pierre loved music. We had a lot of time talking about music, and I've had a chance to do a lot of music, to perform and think about it and whatnot. But bar none, my experiences singing with Pierre were the height of my musical opportunity. It's just beautiful to be with him as a friend and as a fellow tenor, making good music. He suffered me. But, I got to sing next to Pierre. He was in the men's group. He was in, Covenant group and other, but he was in the men's group. And I can't say anything about that because if I do, they'll kill me. It's a sacred bond of trust. But we shared from the heart there for years, and he was dedicated to that. And so many of the men who were there at the beginning, among them Pierre, have passed, and Mark Weedman over there. Hi, Mark, stalwart. Pierre loved Mark. I love you, Mark. It's great to see you. Pierre, as you've heard, struggled with a lot of health concerns, but you'd really never have known it if you weren't close enough to have a chance to see him and hear him off stage, so to speak, offline. He was so long suffering and so clearly capable of moving through the difficulties with grace and with courage. And he showed me how to walk through the difficulties with poise and an unrelenting commitment to doing the right thing in spite of it all, which is heroic. He's just an amazing human being that way. And when it turned out that he needed a kidney, there were a group of us here who jumped at the opportunity, which, doesn't seem like the right metaphor, jumping at the opportunity for giving away part of your body. But I'd give my life for Pierre and would have, and it was truly a gift to be able to serve him that way. And boy, did we have a lot of dinners together. Debbie and Pierre would have summit dinners with Alix and me. We'd cook them. These are auction dinners. And my brother's an executive chef. I've been watching professional chefs for a long time. And Pierre was such a careful and creative cook. It was just wonderful to watch him work. He would take a recipe and he would make it something special. And he would do it with a kind of artistic relish. And then he would drink, and then he would get a little drunk. And if Brendan was around, they'd both get a little drunk. If Kyle was around, they'd get a little drunk. And they'd start singing. And that was always a pleasure at dinner. Yeah, plenty of dinners and fun. We went to Ireland together. You notice Debbie looking down from above. What the is he doing now? Right? Brilliant guy. We would drive, Alix was driving through Ireland. She only got one speeding ticket. And Pierre was in the back seat with me, and we would be driving through the countryside going to the next site, and we were, you know, as someone mentioned earlier, indefatigable, right? Untiring. You'd get up, you'd go. By the end of the day, you'd be ready to stop. No, time to go out, sing. And that was just an amazing fact. And but he was an encyclopedia. He was genuinely a polymath, right? So as we're driving through Ireland, he would tell you about the most obscure histories of the next corner on the road. And he's not reading anything. He knows all of Ireland, from the history through to the current practices of birth control using peat moss or something. It's just, what a guy. What a guy. And we were reading poetry in the back seat of the car. Not his, not mine, but Seamus Heaney and other Irish poems, Irish poets, their poems as we're driving along, Debbie in the front seat with Alix. And we heard a couple of his poems, and I wrote this poem for this occasion for Pierre. So you have to remember, this is sort of the spirit of Pierre as he marches towards the wall of the ring fort, which was the prior picture. The ring fort traditionally protected Irish citizens, people in Ireland who were living in the countryside from attack. And it's sort of a metaphor, I think, for how committed Pierre was to fighting for justice and protecting the vulnerable, protecting the people who needed to be protected. So I'll read this with an effort not to stop and cry. So Villanelle, for the poets out there, Villanelle for Pierre. Scaling the ring fort wall at twilight. How unforeseeable, Pierre, scaling the ring fort wall to taunt perhaps flagrant brigands, Viking raiders to fight in the dwindling twilight, a sight that amazed us all. Flabbergasted, we watched, fearing he would fall from atop the ancient, jagged, rocky height. How? Unforeseeable. Pierre! Scaling the ring fort wall! And as he climbed the rough fortress stair, he sang to forestall the passing of familiar day and the onrush of unknown night in the dwindling twilight. A sight that amazed us all. And what to do else for his friends but to sing along in wounded thrall to our fervent admiration for this dauntless noble knight. How unforeseeable, Pierre, scaling the ring fort wall. Not that Pierre's daring escalade was out of character, nor did it appall. His heroism was constant, glorious, and right in the dwindling twilight. A sight that, Pierre amazed us all. The sun having set, the stars hidden still, Pierre stood tall on the ramparts and called, "Rise, rise," with fierce delight. How unforeseeable. Pierre scaling the ring fort wall in the dwindling twilight. A sight that amazed us all.
And then now, I believe we have an extra special treat. It is a video of Pierre singing for us.
Here,
letting us share in that moment from your wedding so that we could all hear Pierre's beautiful voice singing out in this room one more time. I'd like to invite Pierre's beloved better half, Debbie Wingard.
I think I planned that timing wrong. I should have spoken before the video. Pierre and I did not follow the traditional roles of man and wife. Pierre could not repair or fix things like sighted partners could, although he did try early on. Pierre could not help with the shopping, but he would handle all the phone calls with repair people and businesses. Pierre became an incredible cook, as you've heard, and delighted in taking care of the fresh herbs in the garden. Pierre did most of the cleaning, which I really appreciated. We developed what might be called a symbiotic relationship. Pierre would plan and prep the meals. Then I would get to cook like Julia Child, with everything laid out in small bowls, all prepared. I would read Pierre the words to songs, and then get the pleasure of hearing him practice throughout the week. Before trips, I would read to him about the country, or help him find books on tape. In turn, as you heard, Pierre would remember and share those details to enrich our travels. Many times, Pierre would get into deep discussions with our tour guides, sometimes even correcting them. When we were out for our neighborhood walks, I described the little things we passed, the growth of plants, new flowers, holiday decorations. I tried to remember things I saw during the day or interactions between people I saw. Some things you just can't describe in earshot of those you're describing. At first, I described things to Pierre so that he would not miss out on things. However, I found that over time, I began to see things differently. I was looking with intent and seeing the beauty around me. I noticed the poignant and funny interactions between strangers and friends. This seeing with intent has enriched my life, and describing things did not feel like a burden. I still find myself seeing things and thinking, oh, I have to tell Pierre about that. I hope never to lose that ability to see the world around me. I learned a lot of things being Pierre's partner. He often said, if you can't change it, don't worry about it. I'll admit that one is still hard for me. Pierre lived in the moment and lived life fully. I hope you'll all do the same, and thank you for celebrating this great guy with me today.
Debbie came to see me briefly in my office this morning, just to check in before the service. And I was sitting there with my laptop open, and I sighed, and I put my head in my hands, and I said, I've spent part of this morning trying to find the right words for today, and the internet is failing me. And she said, what happened? And I said, well, I looked up Irish blessings, and what I found to be a traditional Irish blessing was definitely one of Shakespeare's most famous lines. So I think the internet is just not the place to look today. But I suspect that Pierre would have found that very amusing. I hope you all learned something about Pierre today. I hope as you heard everyone up here sharing this incredible man's life, that you felt some of his zeal and love for life, and it's something that you can take with you. I know that Pierre didn't particularly believe we go anywhere after this life, and Debbie and I share the hope that maybe we do. But one way or the other, we get to take the memories of our loved ones and how much love we got to share about Pierre today in this room. Spirit of life and love, God of knowing and unknowing, these moments of connection are the ones that make our lives truly worth living. The next time you make a meal at home, think of Pierre and all of the calm, collected steps to learn about what he's doing, and enjoy your travels, even the minute details of your day, and think of him in love. May life's journey guide you with sunrise on your face, gentle rain on your fields, and a warm breeze at your back. And until we meet again, may you be cradled in the palm of good fortune. Now crack a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. And I would like to invite Maria Munoz up to help extinguish our chalice. She got COVID, that's right. It's Mark. It's Mark coming up. See, I think Pierre's messing with us today. Just a little bit. Keep us on our toes. I decided that I wanted to share a few words from Elizabeth Sully Jones, who is a really beloved and respected Unitarian Universalist. It is how I end all of our services here at Summit, but knowing from the poem how much truth and niceness and warmth mattered to Pierre. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us in our hearts until we are together again. You are all invited to our salon across the parking lot for a reception following the service. Please remain seated for our closing music. Amen, shalom, salam, namaste, ashe, and blessed be. Go now in peace. May you carry Pierre's light, and may the light within you be a blessing to the world.